drowned by the steppe. 1.5-hour train ride from Paris. The trees growing alongside wide boulevards near the railway station are in full bloom. The road leads to the main attraction, Notre-Dame d'Amiens. It is twice the size of Notre-Dame de Paris, probably large enough to fit the entire population of the city. It survived both world wars, which turned the entire city into ruins. It has witnessed many events and seen many people. The slightly blind gentleman in a black frock coat is heading toward the Dubois Street, walking with an almost imperceptible limp. To keep from being detracted from my work, I left the noisy Paris for the tranquility of Amiens, where I have resided since 1871. You may wonder why I chose Amiens. The city is dear to me because my wife was born here. This is also the place where my wife and I met a long time ago, and I am proud of my title as the Municipal Councillor of Amiens just as much as I am of my literary fame. From an interview with writer Zhul Vern. The quiet and cozy Amiens and the Kazakh steppe enveloped in the uprising Kenesary Han and Zhul Vern. Chapter 1. Geohistorical and Geographical Fantasy. Zhul Vern's journey to Kazakhstan. The famous science fiction writer had never been in the Kazakh steppes, unlike a certain character in one of his books, one of the most hyped characters of international cinema, the courier of the Tsar, Mikhail Strogoff. The events unfolding in the Asian part of Russia were of such a nature that they inspired a major concern, and therefore it was no wonder that the Tsar left his guests in the midst of the festivities. The last news received by him confirmed his worst fears. A revolt broke out between the nomads of Turkestan, subjects of the Russian Empire, and it now threatened to spread across the whole of Siberia. The names are fictitious, the territorial locations are a little shifted, true events and real individuals are interpreted in an arbitrary fashion. Years 1837 to 1847 were ravaged by an uprising which was led by Kenesary Kasimov. Over the course of a decade, the events unfolding in the steppe were closely watched by the whole of Europe. At the time, Kenesary was a notoriously famous figure. He amassed a great deal of popularity in Europe, as well as in Russia and Kazakhstan. He was extremely well known. On the pages of the European journal, historian Sereda compared Kenesary with the crushing force of a steppe hurricane. Traveller Semyonov Tenshansky called him Mithridates the Braver. Ethnographer Baron Uslar was the Hun's captive, and English writer Thomas Atkinson praised his military talents. Many have told me that it was the unusual dexterity with the spear and the battle axe that allowed Kenesary's Jigits to be so successful in fighting against overwhelming odds. Having good officers, the Kyrgyz could make the best cavalry in the world. Many of these works were printed in France and of course delivered to Amiens. Needless to say, Zhul Vern was not in the habit of letting scientific, historical or any other types of articles go unnoticed. Zhul Vern used to work extensively with documents in the archives as well as libraries. Many people think that as I write 2 novels a year, I must have it easy. It is not so. Nothing ever comes easy to me. Zhul Vern used to say, each of his novels was thoroughly thought through and carefully developed. He never sat down to write the first chapter unless he already knew what was going to happen in the last. Zhul Vern had an extensive file collection, approximately 20,000 stapled notebooks, which were stored in the oak drawers in the closet. The author used his file directory whenever he was writing his novels. The author's study with the famous file bureau contained scientific discoveries and news from around the world. He started collecting information while he was still living in Paris and training to become a lawyer. Sometimes he got so carried away he missed his lectures, and everything that was collected by Zhul Vern the student came in handy for Zhul Vern the writer. He was fond of reading books about new countries and new continents. By the time, much of the world had already been studied by scientists from France and England. There was a lot to read about. While most of it came from France and Germany, everything was being published in Western Europe, and he never started writing until he had completed his research by reading the appropriate literature. Not only was it professionally written by experts, it was also illustrated by good artists. So it would be fair to say that he had a pretty accurate vision of Kazakhstan, and everything that he described so vividly was absolutely true.
То, что он точно описывал, это абсолютно так.
An incredible journey stretching out for nearly 1,500 versts. Although the geographic details were worked out in the study, all the facts were scientifically sound, backed by numerous notes of competent witnesses. Interestingly enough, the novel was not typical of Vern. He rarely included a love story in his books, and when he did, they tended to be sketchy, to say the least. Love is an all-consuming feeling. My characters require the full use of all their facilities, they need all their energy, and the presence of a beautiful woman beside them would prevent them from carrying out their grandiose plans. But this particular novel is a mix of everything: love, grandiose ideas, espionage thrills, passion, geopolitics, fiction and reality. I'm practically incapable of thinking about anything else at the moment. I am thoroughly consumed by this great story. I've set off to Siberia and couldn't stop to save my life. My novel is more Tatar and Siberian rather than Russian. Chapter 2: Fiction and Reality. Brief summary. Feofar Khan incited a rebellion and his troops were led by traitor Ogarov. According to one version, his prototype was a real person. There were a great number of exiled officers serving in Kenesary's army, most of them Poles. Following the Tsar's orders, Strogov sets off to Siberia to warn his fellow countrymen of treason. On the way he meets a beautiful woman named Nadja.
In Irkutsk wartet man auf einen Kurier aus Moskau, auf irgendeinen.
As the story develops, the courier fights with wolves, bears, gets captured, tortured and faces temptation, but he overcomes all obstacles and marries Nadja at the end of the novel, a historical and geographical fantasy featuring romantic inclusions and Eastern exoticism. This is the way the author chose to express his fascination with all things Asian and Oriental. And it just happened to coincide with certain events in Kazakh history. In it, Vern found the characters and images that he was looking for. He found them in Kazakh history. The camp of Feofar Khan was a bright spectacle, to say the least. Numerous tents made of leather, felt or silk shone brightly in the sun. High plumes crowning their pointed tops were bobbing among the multicolored flags, banners and standards. The richest of these tents belonged to the most prominent persons of the Khanate. A brave man being sent into the thick of the battle with an important message. The story is reminiscent of James Bond. From Moscow to Irkutsk, through the vast land of modern Kazakhstan. One version of Mikhail Strogov manuscripts is kept in St. Petersburg, and in it Feofar Khan appears under a different name, Kenesary. We must not forget that Kenesary Khan was a real person, while all the characters in Mikhail Strogov are fictitious.
Zhul Vern met Honorine at a wedding in Amiens.
Here in Amiens he met Honorine, who already had 2 daughters. Together they had a son and named him Michel or Mikhail. A fictional character with a real name and a real-life person with a fictitious name. One of Zhul Vern's characters is a cruel emir from Bukhara. In real life, the man fought under a different flag, but had a similar personality. The grandson of a Balai, direct descendant of Genghis Khan, a colonel of the Russian Empire. The last Kazakh Khan, Kenesary Kasimov, an extraordinary and controversial individual. He had an interesting personality, combative, uncompromising and brutal. He was harsh and brutal in both politics and warfare. Such is the overall description of the Khan. But the man portrayed by fiction writers is a fictional character. Feofar Khan was a man of 40, tall, very pale, with a ferocious look on his face. A black curly beard hung on his chest in even rows. Without being overbearingly intimidating, he nevertheless made a peculiar impression. His command presence was that of an unchallenged ruler who governs the lives and property of his subjects as he sees fit, and whose power has no limits. Baron Uslar, who spent 4 months at his headquarters, repeatedly met with Kenesary and talked with him. He later wrote about him. Kenesary was a lean man of average height, with Kalmyk facial features. His slightly narrow eyes sparkled with wit and cunning, but his face never betrayed cruelty. The description is quite different from the real-life prototype, and yet it is easy to recognize Han Kene in the proud ruler Feofar Han. For several years he fought for freedom. The story of the rebellious Han captured the attention of the French science fiction writer. In life, Vern was good-natured and loyal to the government, but in his fictional heroes, the author had an outlet for his frustrations. Most of his characters had a rebellious temperament. Chapter 3. From Amiens to Astana. Arbitrary retelling of history and alterations in geopolitical events nearly scared off Vern's publisher Pierre Hetzel, but it is not too dangerous to have a protagonist who serves as a courier of the Tsar and is actively engaged in Russian politics at the very moment when the Franco-Russian rapprochement has become the primary concern of our diplomats. He inquired, indeed, who wanted to be reminded of the uprising at that very moment. The situation was further complicated by the fact that Zhul Vern's portrayal of the Han was not without a certain degree of admiration. It's because of the rebellious spirit of Kenesary Kasimov and the way he was able to hide from the Tsarist authorities for such a long time. They revelled in the grandeur of Feofar Han and the beauty of his wives, admired his officers, his army, and the whole Eastern pomp, which no European festivities could ever emulate to any effect. Moreover, the heroine of the novel is a daughter of the exiled. According to the plot, she sets off to see her father in Irkutsk, via Semipalatinsk.
¿A dónde se dirige?
A Semipalatinsk.
At the urging of the publisher, Zhul Vern contacted Count Orlov, who was the ambassador of the Russian Empire at the time. The latter found nothing objectionable in the matter. Incidentally, one of the first readers of the book was Turgenev. Ivan Sergeyevich praised the novel and believed it to be the best literary work in the bibliography of Zhul Vern. A great many films were made based on this book. The story of Kenesary's rebellion was adapted for the screen in different countries and at different times. The first movie based on the epic adventure was made in 1908 by American filmmakers. Interestingly enough, Vern's son Michel was also trying to make Mikhail Strogoff into a film. Various film adaptations were made in Brazil, France, Germany in 1920s, 30s, 50s and 90s. Many big film studios in the world have created their own adaptations.
Miguel Strogoff, Majestad. Capitán de la Guardia.
The book was also adapted into TV series. In them, Strogoff was an adventurer and Feofar Han, a classic villain. A number of musicals were produced. The most recent one premiered in 2011. There were also a number of animated films, children's versions of Strogoff's incredible adventures. The majority of his books are politically correct and family-friendly. They are great stories for family reading. In different versions, Feofar Han was portrayed as a Persian sultan, a Turkish sultan. The character was played by French, American and German actors. Which one is more like the real character? Probably no one. There are many stories of Zhul Vern's bibliography that are related to our history. There was Kenesary Kasimov and then there was Turksip, which goes to show that the author was generally fascinated with the Eurasian phenomenon. Fiction and reality. In the book, the fate of the rebellious Feofar Han is shrouded in mystery. After completing his role, he disappears from the pages of the novel. In life, everything was much more prosaic and far more frightening. Rebellious Han Kenesary was beheaded, but this is a story of another novel, which Zhul Vern never wrote. A small old town with a population of only 136 people, or something near it. The center of Picardy, near the city of Amiens, a monument to Zhul Vern. Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan, a monument to Kenesary Kasimov, two great men bound by the steppe for all eternity.